So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our last webinar of the year, Cracking the AI Code, a roadmap for agencies and freelancers by our guest speaker, Keanan Koppenhaver, founder of Floorboard AI. So real quick, I wanted to say a couple of words about GreenGeeks for those of you who may be tuning in and not familiar with us. We're a 300% green energy web hosting provider, which essentially means that we put back 3 times the power we consume into the grid in the form of renewable energy. And we have been recognized by the US EPA since 2009 as a green power partner. And finally, we offer share hosting, reseller hosting, VPS, and dedicated server. Now moving on to some housekeeping items for our webinar. If you have any question that you come up with during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A and Keanan will be answering them at the end of his presentation. You can chat in the chat room, but remember to select everyone if you want everyone to see what you're discussing. And as always, we'll record in this presentation, so if you have to step away, do not worry, we'll be sending you the recording in the next couple of days. And finally, we have enabled live transcription. So you have the ability to enable them during the webinar by clicking on the show captions icon. And I'm going to introduce real quick our GreenGeeks team who's here today. We have Erica Barbosa. She will be assisting us with the chat and the Q&A. Hey, welcome, Erica. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Anna. Hi, everyone. I am Erica Barbosa. I am from Costa Rica. Today I'm going to be assisting the chat. I hope enjoy this webinar. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Erica. I'm going to say a few words about Keanan. Keanan is an AI strategist and consultant who helps agencies amplify their impact through practical AI implementation. Drawing from his background as a developer and agency owner, he specializes in demystifying AI technology for creative teams and business leaders. Keanan is also a frequent writer and speaker on AI adoption, focusing particularly on how businesses can develop their AI instinct and use AI to achieve their goals without getting lost in technical complexity. So welcome, Keanan. Would you like to say hi and start your presentation?
Absolutely. Thanks for the introduction and for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where y'all are joining from. But as Anna mentioned, I'm Keanan, and I am excited to get going with y'all. So we're going to dive in. If you are here for, cracking the AI code, you are absolutely in the right place. If not, I hope you stick around anyway, but we're going to get started. So AI is absolutely in the news all over, everywhere. And sometimes, it's headlines like this where, a certain organization or company or team, is seeing their productivity being hugely helped by AI. They're treating it as this is a silver bullet. It's the best thing ever. All great things. There are also very frequently headlines like this where someone or some team has used an AI tool in a little bit of a different way, and it didn't quite give them the results they wanted. In this case, it was a pretty extreme negative result, but we take the good with the bad, and so this presentation will hopefully help you stay closer to the first headline we saw rather than this one, and that's why we're all here. So the overarching theme for our talk today is that all these AI tools that we're going to take a look at and talk about, they still require human involvement. None of these, in my opinion, are a complete autonomous system yet or a silver bullet that will do everything for you. But they already do work incredibly well when they have human input. And kind of a case in point, the first version of this slide was about 3 times as long and way more wordy, but ChatGPT helped me, create this kind of much more punchy sentence there. So the back and forth is something we'll emphasize a lot today. So a little bit about me, Anna already mentioned a little bit, but hi, I'm Keanan. I have a 10-year history in the WordPress world, so a lot of y'all have that same experience. I've worked at a lot of agencies before. I started my own, and I've worked on basically any kind of website you can think of, from a website for a horse veterinarian in New Mexico all the way up to working with the teams on Rolling Stone and some of NASA's projects. I'm a proud-ish Cubs fan. This picture is actually me in Wrigley Field in the middle of winter when the Cubs weren't playing. Some years it's harder to be a fan than others, but I live about 15 minutes north of the stadium in Chicago, so I get down there a lot in the summer. And like Anna mentioned, I help freelancers and agency owners adopt AI through my company, Floorboard AI. So if there's one slide you want to screenshot, take a picture of, etc., this is probably it. Whenever I do a talk like this, I like to put a list of links, resources, a copy of these slides, everything up on a single page for folks to view. So Anna mentioned she'll be sending out the recording, but if you, in addition to the recording, want a list of kind of resources and all of the things that we talk about today, just easily linked for you, this is the place to go. And I'll make sure to put this back up at the end as well. So let's dive into it. I kind of want to think about our discussion today through what I call the 4 stages of AI adoption. So broadly, you can think of these as crawling, walking, running, and flying. And specifically, as they map to AI, this means, using off-the-shelf tools, diving in a little bit deeper and using chatbots, customizing these chatbots and making them a little more advanced. And then, at the flying stage, we're talking about building an AI tool that's completely custom just for you. So we'll look at all 4 of these stages today and kind of investigate each one a little bit and get kind of the highlights of, if this is the stage that you're currently at, how you can, maximize your potential with these tools. So we're going to start at the very beginning. We're going to start with crawling. And this is, if you've heard of AI, but you've never used anything like ChatGPT, or, you don't necessarily know what a large language model is, this is the place where you're probably going to start. And so what I recommend here is looking at tools that, you don't have to use AI explicitly, or you're not, inserting a prompt into a language model or anything like that. But there are a lot of great tools that already use AI under the hood. One of these that I use all the time is Granola. There are a ton of AI note takers out there, and some of them are probably even listening and taking notes on this call. But basically what Granola does is it sits in the background. It listens to any of your Zoom or Google Meet or any other meeting tools meetings. It gives you kind of this Apple Notes style notepad, which you can see on the left of this graphic here, where you can take your own notes or anything, write down anything you want to during the course of the meeting. But then what happens is at the end of the call, as you can see on the right, it basically analyzes the transcript, takes any notes that you took yourself, and enhances them with a bunch more data from the transcript, what people brought up, mentioned, and things like that. So it's really great for, I'm someone who's very guilty of opening a notes document and then getting very invested and engrossed in the meeting and looking back and realizing I've took very few notes or none at all. And with Granola, there's an easy way to kind of get a really robust notes document. And it also provides you with, an interactive web page where you can view the full transcript. You can take any of the bullet points that it put in the notes for you and kind of double click into that and see what the person who actually said that on the call said. It also gives you a little bit of a chat interface. So you can ask, who was the person who was talking about opening our new office in San Francisco or something like that, if you have a specific kind of line of questioning that you want to get without reading the transcript through yourself. So this is a tool that I use all the time and I really enjoy. Just because, like I said, when I get on a Zoom call, I'm really focused on the conversation and what's going on and kind of what I'm thinking about and future plans for future meetings. And I sometimes forget to, take down what we're actually talking about. So I highly recommend, and they have a pretty generous free tier as well, if you just want to kind of check this out and get going. Another tool that I use a lot is called ChatPRD, and this one we're actually going to take a look at how it works. But what ChatPRD is, it's a document assistant specifically designed to help you create product requirement documents, tech specs, that sort of thing. And so, my general flow when I tend to work with a new client is I have a sort of intro call, and then I need to take what we talked about on the intro call and turn it into either a requirements document, a proposal, something similar. And that's, the less fun part for me. I love talking about new ideas and new solutions, but when it comes down to actually, okay, how are we going to put this in writing? How are we going to get this project going? That's where I, sometimes struggle and delay more than I should. So that's an example of where we can use a tool like ChatPRD in conjunction with a tool like Granola to, help get new clients quick started a lot quicker. So let's give a little demo of this real quick. Just for some context here, I'm going to use a recurring example. I have invented a fictional client called the Daily Meow, and the idea is that it's a daily cat blog for, a blog for cat photos, and they've come to me, wanting to rebuild their website, and so we're going to use that as our example for today. So we've compiled some documents here. We're not going to go through actually like recording the call in Granola because the call, like I said, was fictional and didn't exist. But what I have done is created this document that is basically the similar kind of notes to what Granola would record and take notes on for our initial client call. So you can see in this example, they want to use WordPress as their content management system. They're concerned about, image compression and optimization, and they have, a pretty extensive wish list for features they want on their new website. So this is all the kinds of conversations that I would have in an initial client call. And now that I have these detailed notes taken, what I really need to do is transform this into a, project plan so they can sign off on it and we can get going. So let's take a look at how that would work. I've got ChatPRD open here, and we're just going to go ahead and start a new chat. We're going to ask it to help me write a PRD, which is what I want to do. And so I'm just going to grab all of my notes from the call. And I'm going to say I need a PRD for a new website build based on the following client notes. And so we're just going to hit go. And you'll notice that it gives me this kind of chat interface here. And this chat interface is something that we really are going to get used to because it's a very common interface for a lot of these AI tools. And so it says, I'd be happy to help. Please go ahead and share the client notes. And so I can just paste my client notes in here. And right away, it'll take that and it will start creating, this PRD for me. So this is a format that, this tool evangelizes for and likes to use. If you have your own format that you use for proposals or things like that, you can absolutely customize that to your liking. But for me, this gives a very clear, like, here's the main goal, what we're trying to do. And then it goes into, things we want the user to be able to do, things we, don't actually care about, user stories, if that's important to you. And so I don't keep all of this. This is where it's important to kind of keep that human in the loop. I wouldn't just send this to a client as is, but this gives you a really good starting point for something you can kind of tweak and mold to fit your specific workflow. And like I mentioned, if you have, a template that you like to work on, you can give that to a lot of these tools that we'll look at, and it will, create this document for you in that style off the bat. But you can see here, we've got a pretty good project plan. It took our, 12-week timeline and kind of split that up, suggested a little bit of a team, which again, if you're just working by yourself, you might have to tweak this a little bit. But, this gives you a really, really good starting point in much less time, than it would have taken me, for example, to put this together on my own. So at this stage, if you're just kind of getting started, it's not necessarily about doing anything crazy or, brand new or innovative or diving super deep into the machine learning side of things or anything like that. Really what I advise folks to do here is kind of find an AI-ified version of a tool you're already using or a tool that kind of fits into a workflow you already have. So in this case, my workflow of have a client call, turn that client call into notes, turn those notes into a proposal or a project document, and share that back with the client. I was able to fit Granola and ChatPRD into that workflow to speed up some of those steps. Again, not changing anything significant about the workflow that I use or how I work with my clients, but using those tools in an existing workflow is a really good way to kind of get started and see some of these benefits very quickly. So if you're already using some of these tools, you're already using, the AI suggestions and some of the tools that you already use, that's when you maybe, have a little bit more of a use case for some of these chatbot tools. These are a little bit more general. They're not focused on a specific task, but because of that, you can use them to accomplish a lot of different tasks. So the chatbot, like I mentioned, was one of the first interfaces that a lot of people had exposure to with generative AI technology. ChatGPT is probably the most famous one, but a company called Anthropic makes a chatbot named Claude, and a lot of people are familiar with Google's Gemini chatbot as well. And actually, they just came out with a brand new large language model today, I believe. So all these things are always changing, but at the core, these are kind of the three biggest chatbot tools. And they all have different capabilities and technical specifications. We're not going to go too deep into how large language models and these sort of chatbots are trained and created, but based on how they're trained, they all have slightly different capabilities. They give slightly different responses. So it's a good idea to experiment with each of them and figure out which one you like the best. Like I mentioned, they are an interface on top of different large language models. That's the underlying sort of artificial intelligence architecture that allows them to give the responses that they do. And you can get access to most all of these. I believe all three independently. They each cost about $20 a month, but that they all have a free tier option as well. So that's why I really emphasized, using them all on the free tier, finding one you like, and at that point, that's where it probably makes sense to upgrade to a paid version. But the thing about these chatbots, as opposed to some of the other more complicated tools we'll look at, is there's really no configuration necessary. You don't have to train your own model. You don't have to put it on your own infrastructure. You don't have to worry about maintenance or upkeep. This is basically just another piece of software, but a very general purpose one. And so it's great for that. So let's take a look at one of these. I'm using Anthropic's Claude model here. And you can see, similar to what we saw with ChatPRD, we just get a chat interface. So I'm going to use this as an example for, we can ask it basically any general purpose question. So we can ask it, why is the sky blue? And you can see that after a moment, it will start to generate a response for us. So it tells us about Rayleigh scattering. It tells us a little bit about how it works. It even gives us the bonus detail about why sunsets appear red. So this is great. It's really good at language tasks like this. If we instead wanted this in a different format, we could say, can you explain it like you would to a high school student in a musical theater style song? So the underlying these chat tools are language models, right? So any sort of language task they can do pretty well. And you can see here, it took our very scientific explanation and turned it into a song with verse, chorus, lyrics, a bridge, and all of that. So language tasks, things like summarization, transformation of one format into the other, like we just saw, are really effective uses of these tools. I will note that when you ask it for factual information, like why is the sky blue, it does its best, but it's not a direct sort of query or lookup of any sort of factual information. And so it gets a little bit into the process of how these language models are created, but they frequently do produce what we call hallucinations, which means text that sounds good but isn't actually factually correct in some cases. So you always want to double check when you're using this as kind of a factual question answer tool. You want to make sure that you do double check your sources there using some sort of independently verified source. But for things like take this paragraph or turn it into a full blog post, or take this scientific explanation and turn it into a musical theater song, these are really great tools for that. So some recommendations here when you are using these chatbot tools is to always use what we call the frontier models. So these are kind of the latest state-of-the-art models, and it's a good thing I put this asterisk in here. This asterisk was meant to signify that these are the best and brightest models at the time when I put these slides together. As I mentioned, Google released a new model today, so I think these slides are already out of date as of this morning. But these are the models that are trained to be the quickest to respond, the most accurate in terms of information recall, usually have the least sort of hallucinations, and give you just the best kind of response that you can get out of these tools. So it's worth investigating what the current state of the art is, and trying to use those once you find a class of model that you really like. And as I mentioned before, usually that means that you're paying some sort of monthly fee for that. The free tiers on most of these plans give you access to the either slower or smaller models, which are trained on less data. Another tip that is useful, and we'll actually look at this in a little bit, is use documents to give context to your language model. So what I like to tell people is, you can imagine these language models as like your really smart friend who's generally very, very smart, but doesn't know a lot about your specific problem or what you're asking them for help for. So if I had a friend who was a really great programmer and I wanted to ask them for help about my problem that was on my WordPress site, I would need to tell them a lot about what the project was, what problem I was encountering, some of the solutions I've already tried, and like give them all that context before they can be as helpful as they could be, being a really smart programmer. And these chatbot tools are the same way. So you can say anything from, give a very short one sentence prompt of like, I'm working with this client who wants to make a website for this. That will get it started. But the more detail you can give it around what sort of things are important to the client, what tools you're using. We mentioned WordPress, but like if you're using any specific plugins or things like that, the more context you can give it, the better. So uploading PDFs or text documents of project briefs or plugin documentation if you're asking a specific question about a plugin, anything like that that gives the language model more context will be helpful. Most of these models can hold at least 128,000 tokens, which is about 100,000 words in what's known as their context window. So you can think of this as like short-term memory, meaning you could feed, 75,000 words worth of information about your project or your specific problem into the chatbot before you asked it your question. And it would still be able to use all that information to respond, which is pretty amazing. Some of even Google's model, for example, has 1 million or 2 million, token context window, which means you can put multiple books of information in there at once, which is pretty crazy. But the more context you can give these models, the better. And one of the easiest ways is to use documents to do that. So just if we look over here in Claude, you can see we've got this little paperclip icon here, where you can upload any sort of PDF or text document you want to. And they also recently launched a Google Drive integration. So if you have any documents in Google Drive that you want to use as context, you can do that too. And I highly recommend you do. And I think Anna mentioned this in my intro, but really kind of my key point to folks is you need to develop your AI instinct. What's frustrating about these tools is that they're very powerful in a lot of cases, and they're very, dumb or not useful in others. And there's no real clear instruction manual for where those lines lie. And as new models are released, those lines are constantly shifting. So things that you couldn't do with a language model 6 months ago or a year ago are now very much in the scope of what you can do today. And there are things currently that you can't do right now that, in 6 months or a year will probably be very doable with the class of models we have then. So it's important to just kind of keep using these tools and keep experimenting with them. And when you find a use case that they're really good at, like that's when you can kind of always go back to and keep using it for. But as the models change and improve, there will be more things that they can do. And actually things that they can currently do well that they get worse at as well. That's the thing. And that's what's a little bit frustrating, is that there's no black and white rules for, always use an AI tool for this, or large language models aren't good at that. They're constantly evolving and changing. And one of the best ways to get a feel for this is just to practice and experiment a lot and develop that AI instinct. I want to take a brief sideline here, because this is a question I get from folks a lot, to talk about data privacy. So with any of these tools, data privacy is obviously a concern, especially if you're using them to process, like confidential client data. And depending on if you have clients in, the healthcare or financial services industries, like that, data has laws and regulations that go around it as well. So this is kind of how I think about privacy, is on a spectrum between convenience and privacy. So convenience on the very far left is you can go to chatgpt.com completely for free. You get a chatbot. You can put any information you want in there. That's very convenient. It's not very private. All the way on the other side of the line is if you want to run an AI model, a large language model, either on your own computer without it being connected to the internet at all, or on your own server in the cloud through many tools that are available. That is completely private if it doesn't connect to any of those kind of providers that will share or train on your data. But there's a much higher bar of technological complexity, and it's a lot less convenient to get something like that going. So, depending on where you need to be for your specific use case, this will put you kind of somewhere along this spectrum. But a few general rules of how to think about this is read the privacy policy and the terms of service for whichever provider you're using, whether that's OpenAI or Anthropic or Google or some others. They all have pages on their website that specify when they use user submitted data for training and when they don't, and when they're kind of what their data retention policies are, whether they're keeping track of your questions and answers to build new versions of the models, whether your data that you submit will be included in the training data for future versions of the models, et cetera. So they all go into that in pretty good level of detail on their site. But for folks that want a general rule, assume anything that's like through a web interface or on the free tier, where it means you're not paying for it, basically means that they're likely going to use that training data. So that's not an always situation. You definitely want to refer to, like I said, their privacy policy and their terms. But as a general rule, if you're not paying for the AI model and you're accessing it through the web, either like chatgpt.com or claude.ai or Google's Gemini, web chatbot, it's a good rule to not share confidential client information or data that you wouldn't want included in a training set there. I say that because kind of that's the most convenient option, but like I mentioned, I've worked with folks specifically like in hospitals who wanted to use these language models to do help with their diagnostic tests and work with patient data. And they, I helped them find ways to do that in a way that was HIPAA compliant. So even in the most kind of highly regulated industries, you can use these tools. But like I mentioned, there's just a little bit of a higher bar for getting that set up to make sure that your data stays private and isn't shared. Cool. So if you use these chatbot tools for a while, you'll start to, like I said, develop that AI instinct and notice, cases where it works really well, and a bunch of cases where it doesn't work as well and it kind of just falls flat. And so this next portion here is all about how can you increase the amount of uses of large language models where you get exactly what you want as a response, and how can you decrease the times where you don't get what you want as much. So large language models are trained on a huge portion of the internet. And kind of out of the box, if you just like open that chat box, it's very tempting to think of them as like a blank slate where they don't know anything about you personally, or they don't have a ton of context about what you're working on. And this is true of the default kind of state of these chatbots, but a lot of the development recently has been in making these chatbots more personalized to the user. So we're going to look at two different ways that's currently implemented. Number one is a tool called System Instructions. So we're going to go over to ChatGPT here. And similar to Claude, this is a chatbot. It's a large language model. We can ask it any sort of question we want here. But what I'm going to focus on is if I go up here to where this says Customize ChatGPT, you can see here that I have this list of what we call system instructions that I'm instructing ChatGPT how to respond to every single query that I give it. So instead of giving it context for every question that I ask and giving it specific information about how I want the output to be, I can give it these system instructions. So for example, I never want it to tell me about the fact that it's an AI. I already know that. I'm using it for a reason. I don't need that to be included in any of the responses it gives me. If it doesn't know an answer, or it doesn't feel very confident about a particular answer, I want it to tell me that I don't know. One of the downsides of these tools, and what leads to hallucinations a lot of the time, is that if it doesn't have a solid answer to the question that you asked it, it will just try to generate a plausible sounding answer. And that's not something that I want. I want unique, non-repetitive responses. I give it a couple more, ideas here about how to think or how I want it to answer. This one's been kind of interesting. A lot of times the things I'm asking about are relatively location specific, and I don't always remember to mention that I'm in Chicago. And so I just mention here that if I don't, mention context about where I am, assume we're talking about Chicago, if that's the kind of conversation we're having. So you can see up to 1,500 characters here of this kind of custom, advice for how to respond. And this means that, for every new chat after I provided this information, it will respond in that way. And this is unique to me. So I can basically put whatever I want in here and make this, a much more useful tool specifically for me. And I can also, save on every time I give it a new prompt, having to specify kind of how I want it to respond, or getting a response back that I don't necessarily like, and then having to go in and ask it for an updated response. So I would highly suggest, if you use a tool like ChatGPT, to use these system instructions because they're really useful. And again, here we also have custom instructions, which are basically you can tell ChatGPT a lot about yourself, people in your life that you want it to know about, so that those conversations can flow a lot more easily without it constantly having to come back and ask for context there. Bouncing back over to Claude, we're going to take a look at something called projects, which is a very cool tool that they have. And basically what projects are is kind of a container for any particular project that you might be working on. So in this case, we're going to continue our web example here. And we're going to create a project for our Daily Meow. And you can see this kind of looks similar to the Claude that we were looking at before, but over here, you see that we have project knowledge. So similar to our custom instructions, our system instructions that we had in ChatGPT, you can specify instructions specifically for this project. So for example, if I'm working on a blog post maybe, and I have a blog post set up as a project, and the client that I'm writing for, always wants to avoid first-person language, I might put that as a custom instruction in here so that any sort of outlines or anything that I use Claude to generate will avoid that first-person language, right? And that, again, can be project specific. The second thing that's really cool is you can set project knowledge. And this is where those documents and other things come in. So if we remember before, we have these three documents over here. We have notes from our client call. We have our project plan that we generated with ChatPRD. And then we have the actual kind of proposal that I wrote for the project and the client. We can drag all of these in here and add them as knowledge. So now when we ask a generic question, like what is the launch plan, an out-of-the-box large language model wouldn't have enough information to answer this question directly. It wouldn't know what project we were talking about. It wouldn't have any idea about the timeline we had set for the launch, et cetera. But now if we ask something like, what's the launch plan? We start this Claude chat, which is similar to what we had before, but you can see based on the documents, it's now referencing the knowledge that we gave it. And so it's creating this launch checklist for us based on everything we put in the proposal, everything we talked about in the initial client call, and all of that. So you can either keep going with this chat, or you can go back and you can create as many chats as you want inside of this project. So what I recommend to agency folks who are working with a lot of different clients are create a project for each of your clients that then anyone on your team can use, and you can pre-seed it with any sort of relevant client material, any particular documents that you've created, artifacts from the project itself, and that just becomes a really good place to go and again use these powerful tools in a way that's more specific to your particular use case and helps you because it's armed with this specific knowledge. So you can obviously at any time you want to, you can remove stuff from knowledge and add more. But you can see even with these 3 documents, we've only used 2% of the capacity of knowledge that we could give to this project. So you can put things like ticket descriptions in here. You can put all sorts of things to give the AI model that necessary context for whatever project you're working on. Cool. So we've adopted some off-the-shelf tools. We've started using public chatbots. We've bent them to our will a little bit. We've customized them. But every once in a while, you'll run into something where you've got kind of a more complex workflow or something else that you want to do that's not quite in the realm of what you can achieve, even with the personalization and kind of customization of these chatbots. And that's where the idea of custom tools comes in. So, in addition to using these AI tools that are built for you, we've kind of come full circle now, and you can now build your own AI-enabled tools. And so we can take a look at what this looks like through something I call the customer research workflow. So every once in a while, I own a couple WordPress plugins, and when I get the Stripe email that says, "Hey, you have a new customer," I often go through and look at what the domain name on the email is. I say, "Oh, this is interesting. I don't know who this customer is. Who is this person?" I'll put their domain name into Google Chrome, and I will go look up their website and kind of see what they do and who they are and who they work for. And that's really interesting to me personally, just because I get customers from all sorts of different places. I'm not very focused in that regard, and so it's interesting to see a cool new domain come by. But what I was thinking was, this would be a really cool thing to just have happen automatically for me, as opposed to me having to look at every notification, go to the website manually, all that sort of thing. So there are a lot of these sorts of automation tools that exist on the market today. Most people are familiar with Zapier. Make is another one. I'm going to look at a product called Retool. So I'm a little biased. Retool is my day job as well. I work as a product marketer there, but it's a really great tool for these sorts of automations. And so we're going to look briefly at how I sort of automated this kind of research process that I do for all the new customers of my plugin. So this is inside of a thing we call Retool Workflows. And basically, it allows you to drag and drop different blocks onto the screen. And these blocks all have different logic steps. So you can see we've kind of constructed this 5-step workflow here. And basically what it does is at the beginning, it's triggered. So this will be something that I've hooked up to Stripe to manually trigger this. In our case, we'll just use this customer email here for testing. So we've got Tim Cook at apple.com. We're going to pretend he's our newest customer. So it passes any information that it gets in from being triggered into this next step, which is a block of JavaScript. And what this JavaScript does is it just splits the email apart. And all I'm interested in is this second part, the domain name at the end, right? So you can see that if I run this, it splits the domain name, it splits the email address apart, and it says, okay, the domain of this new customer is apple.com, right? Which is great. I then pass all that information to this next block, which is a block of Python. And what this does for folks who don't know Python is it basically loads the home page that we got from this domain and grabs all of the HTML. So it's not going to be the most interesting thing to look at just because it's a lot of HTML in here. But this is all of the HTML for the apple.com homepage. So once we have that, this is where AI comes in, right? We have this parse homepage block. And you can see here it's using AI to generate some text for us. And I asked it to use the following HTML from a company's homepage to generate a 1-paragraph description of what the company does in a conversational tone, right? And then I say, okay, here's the HTML that you need. And that's what we got in the previous step. And so in this case, I'm also telling it that, you're an expert company researcher who uses your ability to browse the web to gather information on new customers. So giving it, again, a little bit more context about who I want it to pretend to be and what sort of role I want it to have. So it runs that. And then I have it here just kind of post the results of that in Slack. And so once that's all put together, we can actually just hit run down here. And it will go through and run all of those steps piece by piece. So once they're done running, it will actually show up here in the left. And you can see my Slack notification just pinged here. And it says, great, you've got a new customer. Your contact was Tim at Apple. That's the original email address that came in. And then it has, a paragraph or two about who Apple is, what they do. And this would be really useful to just kind of see, okay, great. Now thinking about if they're a customer of my plugin, how could I reach out to them and say, hey, thanks for buying a plugin. Here are a couple ways I think you could use it, and kind of start that, more proactively, as opposed to having to do that on a reactive basis. So this is an example of, the kind of thing that would have been very difficult to automate, before the invention of these large language model tools. But now that we have them, I can build these sort of one-off tools for things that I want to do. This is not necessarily something I could just like buy off of the shelf, but this is something that I wanted to exist. And through these kind of do-it-yourself tools, especially combined with AI, it's a tool that you can make exist, which is great. And if you want to go even deeper than this was an example that was kind of very drag and drop, very little code. But most all of the large language models have very well documented APIs. So if you are working in a code base, you are a developer who is very familiar with using code, whatever language you develop in, you can interact with all of these tools using code as well. And you can kind of customize them even further, introduce large language model features into your applications, or even build, brand new AI tools from scratch. Which again kind of brings us full circle to, we started, using pre-built AI tools that others had built, but now we, have the knowledge to build our own, which is really powerful once you start thinking about all of the kind of one-off tools that you need for something at work, or something that would just make your life a lot easier. As you pick up more and more knowledge here, you can start to build those things. So I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. It looks like we have done that. So again, thanks for having me. I hope that this was useful, and I don't expect you to, go out and kind of speed run this run, walk, fly curve, but hopefully this has given you some things to think about, and a couple tools to explore and investigate to help streamline your business a little bit.
Great. Thank you. Yes, there are a few questions in the Q&A, Keanan.
Cool.
So Marilyn is asking, what are the best AI tool to edit book writing or blog writing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So tools for editing. I personally like Claude as, a writer and an editor. I think, at least for me, it matches most closely the kind of writing and like writing style that I like. So again, it would probably be the case of, giving it as much context as you can about what, book you're writing, kind of what you've already written, what you're looking for editing support on. Another tool that I really like, and I'll show this here, is a tool called Lex.page. The cool thing about this is, and you can actually see that I was working on the outline for this presentation in here. So this is a very similar interface that you might be used to if you're using like Google Docs. But what's cool is if you're specifically looking for editing, they have all of these checks here. So I can ask it to, check if there are any places where I'm using passive voice, or identify places that, probably could be useful if I had cited my source there, or anywhere where there's repeated words. And I can just have it run this against, my outline, and it should just go through and flag any places where any of the checks that I selected are relevant, right? So, like, I'm guessing it's telling me that I'm perfect here on passive voice, which is good. But the cool thing about this is, you could do this in a tool like Grammarly as well. But what makes Lex really unique and different is you can insert your own custom checks as well. So, for example, you can see that I have this check here called "What would Kelsey say?" And basically, this is our content person at Retool has and enforces our company style guide. And so instead of submitting a first draft of a blog post to her, having her come back and tell me all of the ways that it violated the style guide, I now have this check in here that I can run that takes my first draft, runs it through the style guide, and lets me fix a lot of those things ahead of time, and to make that makes all of our writing a lot more consistent. That's the kind of thing where if you had a personal style guide or things that the editor you were working with really wanted to make sure that you got down in your writing, you could create that custom check and have a lot of that done for you, and able to take a first draft to something that's much more polished a lot more quickly.
Okay, great. Someone is suggesting also Grammarly as well in the chat.
Yeah, Grammarly's been
Yeah.
around a long time, and they've been around a long time for a reason. They integrate into a lot of existing tools, which is really nice. The Lex is is a standalone tool that you kind of have to use a little bit separately. So if you already have a writing tool that you like, something like Grammarly that integrates into that more closely might be a better option.
Great. We have another question here from SC. Would any of these help with coming up with a recommendation if my input is lots of paragraphs of different requirements where some may contradict another?
Yeah, it's a good question. So coming up with recommendations where your inputs might contradict each other. I would say it's pretty good at that. One thing that I will frequently do is if I have a requirement or a technical specification, I will input it, just paste the entire thing into a tool like Claude or ChatGPT, and then say, if you were a developer who was going to write this, like what questions would you have or what things are unclear? You can also ask it what things contradict each other. And actually, one of the tools that I mentioned that the medical customer developed was a tool for their legal department where they would feed it all of their contracts and legal definitions and all of that, and ask it to flag anything from where one document contradicted another. So again, that's a pretty like language-based task. And those are where these large language models are really successful. So I think you should have pretty good success with that. If you just explicitly ask it for, before you start on anything I've asked you to do, please first point out if there are any contradictions here that I should be aware of or to try to resolve.
That makes sense. Let's see, we have another question here from Vanessa. How do you ensure that if you upload material, possibly confidential to a client, are not taken to the LLM database? I think this is something you covered earlier in your
Yeah,
presentation.
it's a good question. And like I mentioned, it's back here on the kind of convenience versus privacy spectrum. So there's a wide range of this, right? And this is where this first point really applies. So read the privacy policy and terms of service pages of whichever provider you're using. So for example, if you're using Claude, you can just Google like Claude data training, and it should give you, a page right here about how do you use personal data in model training, right? So it acknowledges that, large language models need to be trained on text. And so it says about Anthropic specifically that they use publicly available data sets that they license from third-party businesses, and data that our users provide, right? So basically what they're saying is, they're not trying to train models on your personal data specifically, but then they go into like a little bit of, more detail about what that means, right? So here they note that like on the free plan or even on the pro plan, they will not use inputs or outputs to train our models, right? So with Claude, like that's specifically outlined here. If you wanted to use ChatGPT or Google's Gemini or something else like that, you should find, a similar page like this on both of their websites. But it's really important to just kind of review this and make sure that this lines up with the requirements that you have.
Yeah, great, thank you. Daryl is asking, do all of these tools only run online, or can some of them be downloaded to run offline on my laptop, where the data if you would use are in files on my laptop?
Yeah, it's a good question. For the most part, these tools do run online, just because up until recently, people's own computers didn't have the computing power to be able to run these language models efficiently or at any type of speed. And so that's why, they needed to run on the provider's own infrastructure. But recently, especially with some of the new MacBooks and some of the other machines, computers are becoming powerful enough now to run these, especially some of the smaller models on your local machine. So you can absolutely do that. The one tool that I would recommend to look into for that is Local LM. It's basically, or LM Studio, sorry. So it's basically a tool that runs on your computer, and you can see the interface looks very similar to a ChatGPT or a Claude type of tool. But basically, you choose which model you want to use, you download it onto your computer, and then this can all run, whether you're on an airplane without Wi-Fi, whether you just don't want to connect to the internet and give data back to the model providers. These models run entirely on your computer. And so they're entirely kind of disconnected from the internet. You don't have to worry about the data sharing, data privacy, that sort of thing. Like I mentioned, the trade-off here is that they'll run a lot slower in most cases because your single computer's hardware most of the time isn't as strong as the hardware that the models online are running on. And secondly, just based on, again, hardware limitations, you're usually required to run smaller, when I say smaller, I mean models trained on less data, smaller models, and those models will just run a little bit slower. So something to keep in mind. You may not get as good of results, especially without kind of messing with your prompt a little bit to make it more specific. But there are ways that you can run these models entirely locally, disconnected from the internet.
Okay, thank you. Daryl is asking, can any of these tools build HTML code that mimics the style given in an example?
Absolutely. That is a good use case for this tool called V0. This is a tool that Vercel put out. And I want to see if I can get an example of this, right? So here's one. Can I go back and find my previous chat? So I had this idea for a tool where I wanted to just be able to upload an MP3 file, and I wanted it to give me back, an MP3 file with any, swear words, explicit language, or other words that I specified, kind of bleeped out with that, that TV censorship bleep, right? So I had this idea, and I'm not a designer. I wanted some help building a landing page for this tool. And so what I said was, let's generate a landing page. I gave it a little bit of information about what the tool did. I gave it a color scheme. And then I actually also gave it these screenshots of like similar tools that I had seen on the internet before. And I said, I want you to use these as kind of inspiration. And so, it did. It built me this landing page component here. And it has, you can see my chat here. We went back and forth on a lot of the specifics, and let's make the button less rounded, that sort of thing. But this is definitely an option. The other option is Claude will actually do this for you as well. So we can build a basic like a basic calculator. And Claude has access to a tool called Claude Artifacts, which means that looks like it's taking a little bit to think here. Claude is down, apparently. That's not great. But essentially what it will do is it will pop out a little sidebar panel where it will actually write HTML and JavaScript for you. So you can do things like really easily build pretty basic web components. Let me see if I can find one that I already did, just since it's not loading for some reason. Yeah, perfect. So here's an example where I asked it to, build a simple web app that allows you to input current revenue, future revenue, and total months to let you calculate, the growth rate that you would need to hit a revenue goal, right? And so, it then built this completely interactive calculator that I can enter, current revenue here. I can enter, target monthly revenue, and I can say I want to hit this goal in 2 years. And it will do the math for me and say, great, you have to grow, 10% a month to hit that goal. So this is, again, something I could have built myself, but, I can just take this and it gives me all of the code here and embed this into, another tool or anything like that. So there are definitely tools there that will do that for you. I will say that most of them use Tailwind and things like that for CSS. So if you have a different sort of CSS preference or CSS stack, you might have to do a little bit more customization there. And they largely focus on React as well for JavaScript. So again, if you have a slightly different stack, you need to tweak that a little bit, but there are a lot of tools that will generate code for you for sure.
Thank you. William is asking, how can I integrate a chatbot into a WordPress site?
Good question. So there are a few different tools that will help you do this. I don't know any off the top of my head. I would recommend just Googling that. But there are tools that, number one, you can train on if you want to, for example, let folks ask questions about your support documentation or ask questions about specific blog posts. You can kind of give all of that to the models as training data. I know that DocsBot is one that does that in particular. So this is more focused on the documentation side of things, but basically this is a tool where you can feed in all your documentation, and then you can have users say like, oh, how do I, upgrade my plan? And it will go find the relevant piece of documentation and return that answer to them. So this is used to, for a lot of like really low level support requests, things like that. This is a pretty good tool, and it has a really solid WordPress integration. But there are lots of other chatbot tools out there. Most of them aren't WordPress specific, but they can just be embedded on your website, and given a set of training data, you can go from there.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. SC is saying that's good to know that there exist self-hosted models, which you were talking earlier in your presentation. Which of these self-hosted models are affordable now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I mean, I think that they're all relatively affordable. One of the nice things about all these different models competing with each other is that for the most part, they just continue to get cheaper. Um, Most of these models here that are available in LM Studio are actually what they're calling open source models. People debate about whether they're truly open source, but the relevant portion for this discussion is that means you can download and use them for free because you're running them on your own computer and you're using the free models that basically doesn't cost you anything to run. So that's how if you're most concerned about cost, that's how I would get started there. Again, with the trade-off of it's going to be a little bit slower and maybe the responses aren't going to be quite as good. But for things like Claude and ChatGPT, you get access to kind of the best in class models on each of these for $20 a month, which means that's essentially unlimited usage through this sort of chat interface. If you want to access it through some other tool or use an API, they are priced relatively competitively on the API side as well. So, for example, I'll zoom this because it's probably a little small. ChatGPT 4.0, which is the model that you see ChatGPT using here, basically will cost you $2.50 for 1 million input tokens. You can think of that as about 750,000 words, which is quite a bit. And it will charge you, $10 for getting 750,000 words out, right? So that's quite a lot of text. That's probably more than I produce in a month, for sure, and more than I work with. So, if you don't want there's like the flat rate, the $20 a month for, as much as you want to use it inside this web interface. Same thing goes for Claude. But if you want to integrate it with another tool or use it by the API, they have pricing there for each of these different models as well. But in my mind, like these have come down like 2 or 3 times at least from when these models were initially released, and the models continue to get faster and cheaper, which is an amazing thing to see.
Yeah, that's great. Brandy is asking, does ChatGPT have the ability to split chats into projects like Gemini? How much is Claude?
Okay, 2 separate questions. I'll take the first one first. Claude is $20 a month, I believe, for the kind of pro tier. But this anthropic.com/pricing will have the most up-to-date version of that. Yeah, 18 if you decide to pay annually. Otherwise, it's 20. And that gives you, all the different models and things. They obviously have, a couple other tiers as well. But that information is all there. As far as ChatGPT having the ability to do projects like we looked at with Claude, you absolutely can. It works a little bit differently. In this case, these are called custom GPTs. So you can see here that there's a lot of these that people have created and shared publicly, where you can give it a ton of context. So for example, here's one that I've built. Basically, I'm working on my private pilot's license at the moment. And one of the things that I'm not as great at yet as I could be is like talking to the air traffic controllers. And so what I've done is basically created this custom GPT that simulates, what talking to an air traffic controller is like. And what that looks like behind the scenes is that I've given it, how do I get to that actually? My GPTs here. Yeah, you can see that I've given it some context. I've, given it custom instructions, and I've uploaded a bunch of sample kind of conversation files to give it context about how it should respond and that sort of thing. So this is the most similar to the custom projects in Claude. You could absolutely do this in ChatGPT as well. The thing I like about the custom GPTs is that you can actually share them with other people, which, as far as I know, isn't an option in Claude right now.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to another question. Paul is asking, can you build a tool with Stack that takes an article title and posts it to a database?
Yes, I'm not sure what Stack is, but I would love to hear more about that at some point. But basically, that's probably where you'd get into something like this, where it's a little bit of a custom workflow. So using either something like Zapier or Retool, you would get your kind of list of article titles, and then through one of these blocks, like handle the insertion into a database. It sounds like there's something that has a little bit of multiple steps, and so that's where you'd want to use more of a custom built tool like this for sure.
Okay. Daryl is asking, are the APIs, application program interfaces, invoked from programs? What type of code are these programs written in? Basic C, C++, C++, HTML, other? A little technical question.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a technical question. The short answer is like you can basically call the API, the large language model APIs from whatever language you would like. I've built a WordPress plugin that calls them from PHP. I have Python scripts that use Python to call them. A lot of the packages and tools that are written around these APIs are in Python, just because that's what's popular right now. But they're just out of the box like REST APIs. So any tool that can call a REST API can call these large language model APIs as well.
Yeah, okay. G. Williams, do you have a structured approach that you'd be willing to share when researching problems, clients, etc.?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think would love to, if you could put a little bit more detail about that in the chat, that'd be helpful. But as far as researching problems like around what large language models are good at and not, I can take it in that direction. Um, Again, it's kind of just like a little bit of a trial and error process. I know that's not a very satisfying answer to folks, but just a lot of trial and error. And as far as like finding problems that clients have and things like that, it's getting into like settings like this webinar, or having one-on-one phone conversations where we dive into what does your day-to-day look like, and start to think about, okay, which of these things that you have to do are a good fit for the kinds of solutions that AI tools and large language models can provide. So you could do, a fair bit of like reading on the internet and seeing what people post on sites like Reddit and Hacker News and stuff like that. But for me, there's been no good substitute for, a one-on-one conversation, or, a presentation like this with Q&A, where folks who have really pressing questions are able to ask those.
Yeah, makes sense too. Leone, I hope I'm saying it right. If the website your Python code was scraping in your example happened to encode information in a bunch of graphics or images, would it not be able to find out very much? Or do you integrate again, some image translation to handle such things? I think it's talking to
Yeah,
someone
it's a
you
good
were referring to.
question. Yeah, it's a good question. So we're talking about here on the workflows side of things, I believe, and this is the page that basically scraped, the customer's homepage. So in the case of Apple, like I would assume that they actually do have a lot of imagery on the page, which yeah, it looks like they do.
Yeah.
So in this case, like this is really not going to be parsed at all. The cool thing about a lot of the new models specifically is that they are what are known as multimodal, which means they can handle image parsing as well. So for example, if we go to Claude here and we just look for, let's like look for this maybe. Let's look for like interesting background. Okay, it's not really what I was looking for, but sure, we'll try this. So we'll grab this down here. And if we go over to Claude and we say, all right, Claude, we want to, just like we can upload a PDF, we can upload this image as well. And so, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's try that again. So if we go to Claude, we can, so we have this here. We have this image uploaded. And so I can say like, please describe to me what is in this image. And because this model is what we call multimodal, it's able to actually parse through the image and describe what it sees there, right? So you can specifically, when you are, calling these models via API or things like that, you can, specify that you're giving it images. But by default, if we're just passing all of that homepage HTML, it's not going to load each of the images and parse through those. It's just going to look at the text that it can see and infer anything it can from the HTML elements that are on the page. But the newer models especially do have the ability to parse images if you ask them to do that specifically.
Great. We have here a question from Sarah. I'd like to learn how to build custom AI tools. Are there any resources you recommend for learning this? I'm comfortable with advanced LLM prompting, but that's as far as my knowledge goes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, YouTube is great to start. Like there are YouTube videos on any sort of platform you can imagine. Like I mentioned, there are a bunch of different platforms out there that will all have kind of their own sort of educational resources. So Retool is one. I'll just put some of these links up here so folks can see. Zapier is another. I don't know if they have an AI page specifically, but again, these kind of like workflow tools and app building tools exist, even if you're not as comfortable with the coding side of things. So I would just look into tools like Retool and Zapier and see what educational resources they have. And if you decide on one that you feel like you really like, that's where then at that point going to YouTube and saying, hey, what are the like tutorials that I can see on this particular tool or examples of how to build things in this particular tool is really helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. We have a few more quick questions. Shulamit is asking, besides just being an extremely fast tool, how is it different from old version of search engines? I guess AI.
Yeah, good question. So this is what we talked about a little bit in the beginning with regards to the hallucinations and things. So at their core, like large language models are predicting what they think the next word in a given sequence will be, given all the information they've trained on. So it's less a like direct lookup of resources or links, which is what a search engine is, and more of kind of a generation of text, which is why they're called generative AI. So that's where the sort of hallucinations, incorrect information, all that comes into play. I've seen it most frequently when I use it for coding. It will invent, libraries or other coding tools that don't exist. It will just make them up because it thinks they need to exist or should exist. And that's where you really start to see the fact that, it at a lot of levels, it's just kind of trying to figure out what the next logical word in a sequence is. Whereas a search engine, like if I searched for a coding library, it would only show me coding libraries that do exist, right? So there's pros and cons, and some of these tools are definitely starting to bridge the gap a little bit. So there are tools like Perplexity and even ChatGPT now, where if you ask for like here, for example, the future of SEO, it will actually it will give you like sources that it used to generate its answer. So this is a little bit of a combination between search engine and generative AI. And even if if you've seen in Google search results, they're starting to do this sort of generative AI piece at the top as well. So the lines are definitely blurring, but it's important to remember that large language models are not search engines. They are, models that generate language based on a set of inputs and their training data, whereas search engines are, direct lookup tools, and they won't do as much of the like generation piece, but they will give you, sources that for sure exist.
Right, that actually makes sense. Jerome is saying AI is being integrated more and more in website creation tools to simplify the life of businesses with little web knowledge. How do you think this will affect freelance web developers who are losing their edge with time?
It's a good question. I think there's always a risk with these tools that some of the work that we are currently doing will no longer be necessary to be done by humans. I think my experience going back and forth with like that V0, that landing page example that we looked at, really shows me that like these tools have a long way to go still to produce things that are unique and interesting. And like we mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, like the tools right now are best when they are used hand in hand with human input, human judgment, and human prompting. So, I don't think we are anywhere close to a world where anyone can just put in a couple sentences of text and get a perfect website. In just the same way that no one can hire a freelancer and only tell them a few sentences of what they want to do and get a product that matches what they were hoping for, right? So I think these tools can speed up a lot of the work that freelancers and agencies are already doing, but really they're still best when they have that kind of discerning judgment of a human, to say no, like this isn't quite right, or this is a great start, 60 or 70% of the way there. Now I want to take it and do the last 30% myself. And personally, that's how I use it for things like writing and and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. Someone already answered the question that was placed in the Q&A. What is CSS? Someone answered in the chat. Do you
Appreciate
want
it.
to? Yeah, CSS. Daryl is asking, would you list the names of the downloadable AI tools and how much they cost?
Sure. So like I mentioned, I would start looking at this tool called LM Studio. And again, basically you can download this, and then once it's on your computer, you can choose. It helps you a little bit, but you can choose based on your computer specifications and what you're trying to do, which model you want to host here. So all of these that it supports, for the most part, are free and open source. And so you don't necessarily have to worry about the cost when it comes to these. It's more of a situation of, how big are the models? How much data have they been trained on? And is that something that your computer can support? So because the models are free and you're running all of the computation on your computer itself, this is these are mostly a free option to get started. It's when you start using some of the proprietary models, and running it, in the browser or on their infrastructure, that's where it starts to cost money.
Yeah. Good. Okay. I don't see any more questions. I see a lot of comments that it was a great, super informative presentation. So thank you, Keanan. And thank you, everybody, for staying to the end. And thank you, Erica, for being there and checking the chat.
Thank
And
you.
Keanan, yeah, thank you. And then, Keanan, you have your contact information. I was going to ask you.
Yep,
Great.
absolutely. Happy to, emails from folks, or, because my name is relatively unique, this at symbol here, this at handle, is where you can find me on most every social channel. So absolutely, if you have any questions that we either didn't get time to talk through, or you think of as soon as we log off, please let me know.
Thank you. And so, okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for everyone for the very good questions. And just stay tuned for more webinars at greengeeks.com/webinars. And we'll do more stuff next year in 2025. Thank you. I'll let everybody go. Thank you, Keenan. Thank you, Erica. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
y'all.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.